Jonathan sat alone in his opulent penthouse, the twinkling lights of the city sprawling beneath him like a sea of stars. The lavish decorations adorned every corner of the space, each glimmering ornament a testament to his wealth and success. Yet, as the countdown to the new year echoed in the background, he felt an overwhelming sense of isolation. Empty champagne bottles cluttered the marble countertops, remnants of a party that had long lost its allure. He glanced at the wall clock, its hands inching closer to midnight, and a profound emptiness settled in his chest. The laughter and cheer of the gala he had just returned from felt like a distant memory, merely a backdrop to the hollowness he had grown accustomed to. All around him, the sounds of celebration filled the air, but inside he felt a stark contrast, a void that echoed louder than the cheers of the crowd. His mind drifted back through the years, reflecting on the endless parties, the superficial conversations that never seemed to scratch the surface. He had built himself a fortress of success, but within its walls, he had become a prisoner of his own making. "What's the point?" he muttered to himself, the words barely audible over the countdown. Another year, another empty celebration. Suddenly, an impulsive idea struck him. What if he spent New Year's Eve somewhere else, somewhere far removed from the glittering facade of his life? He thought of Clara, his housekeeper, a woman whose warmth and kindness always seemed to seep through the coldness of his existence. She lived in a modest home, filled with the kind of warmth that money could never buy. He remembered the way her laughter echoed through the halls when she spoke of her children, her stories rich with love and resilience. Without a second thought, he grabbed his coat and headed for the door. The cold night air hit his face as he stepped outside, a stark contrast to the warmth of his penthouse. He hailed a cab, the driver glancing at him curiously as he climbed in. "To Southside, please," Jonathan instructed, his heart racing at the unexpected adventure ahead. During the ride, he watched the city lights blur past, a mix of excitement and dread swirling within him. What would Clara think of his sudden visit? Would she welcome him, or would he be intruding into a world that was so different from his own? As the cab rolled to a stop in front of her modest home, he took a deep breath, steeling himself for the unknown. The house was unassuming, with peeling paint and a small porch adorned with a few handmade decorations. It stood in stark contrast to the opulence he had just left behind. Jonathan hesitated for a moment, the weight of his decision settling in. But then he knocked on the door, his heart pounding in his chest. Clara opened the door, her expression shifting from surprise to warmth in an instant. "Mr. Jonathan," she exclaimed, her eyes wide, "what are you doing here?" I thought I'd come by and wish you a happy new year," he stammered, the words feeling foreign on his tongue. "I hope it's not too much of a surprise." "Surprise? No, it's just unexpected," she said, stepping aside to let him in. "Please come in. I wasn't expecting anyone tonight." Jonathan stepped over the threshold, immediately enveloped in the inviting aroma of home-cooked food and warmth. The modest living room was adorned with simple decorations. Handmade garlands hung from the walls, and the flickering light of a small fireplace cast a cozy glow. It felt alive in a way his penthouse never did. "Can I get you something to drink?" Clara asked, her voice laced with a mixture of curiosity and concern. "No, thank you. I just wanted to be here," Jonathan replied, his gaze wandering around her home. It was filled with family photos, each one telling a story of love and togetherness. He felt a pang of envy. In his own life, such moments felt like a distant dream. "Are you sure you're okay?" Clara asked, her brow furrowing with concern. "You look a little out of place." Jonathan chuckled softly, shaking his head. "I suppose I am. I just wanted to experience something real for a change." Clara's eyes softened. "Well, you're welcome to stay as long as you'd like. It's just me and the kids tonight, but I'm sure they'd love to see you." "Kids?" Jonathan asked, intrigued. He had never thought much about Clara's life outside of her role as his housekeeper. "I didn't know you had children." "Yes, 2 little ones," she said, her face lighting up at the mention of them. "They're sleeping right now, but they'll be up soon. They're excited about the new year." Jonathan felt a warmth spread through him at the thought of children's laughter filling the house. "I'd like to meet them," he said, a genuine smile breaking through his earlier somber demeanor. As they settled into the living room, Clara began to share stories about her children, her voice animated and lively. "My daughter Lily is a little artist. She loves to draw and paint. And my son, Max, is obsessed with dinosaurs. You should see the way he lights up when he talks about them." Jonathan listened intently, captivated by the passion in her words. "That sounds wonderful," he said, his heart swelling with a sense of belonging that he hadn't felt in years. "I wish I had a childhood like that." Clara paused, studying him with a hint of curiosity. "What was your childhood like, if you don't mind me asking?" Jonathan sighed, the weight of his past creeping in. "I grew up in a world of privilege, but it was lonely. My parents were always busy, caught up in their own lives. I had everything I could ever want, but I never really had anyone to share it with." Clara nodded, her expression understanding. "I can see how that would be hard. But you're not alone anymore, Mr. Jonathan. You're here, and that means something." He looked into her kind eyes, feeling an unexpected connection forming between them. "Thank you, Clara. That means a lot to me." As the minutes passed, the atmosphere shifted, filled with warmth and an unspoken understanding. Jonathan realized that he had stepped into a world far removed from his own, a world where love and laughter were the true riches. And for the first time in a long time, he felt a flicker of hope that perhaps, just perhaps, he could find his way back to authenticity. As they gathered in Clara's modest kitchen, the aroma of sautéing onions filled the air, mingling with the laughter that bubbled up between them. Jonathan stood awkwardly by the counter, his finely tailored clothes feeling out of place in the cozy, somewhat cluttered space. Clara, in her simple, worn apron, moved with grace and ease, her hands deftly chopping vegetables as she hummed a soft tune. The kitchen, with its faded floral wallpaper and rustic wooden cabinets, was a stark contrast to the sleek, sterile environment of Jonathan's penthouse. Despite his discomfort, he found himself intrigued by the warmth that radiated from Clara's home, a warmth he had long been missing. "Do you need help with anything?" he asked, his voice slightly hesitant. Clara glanced up, her dark eyes sparkling with humor. "Not unless you know how to chop like a chef. Otherwise, just keep me company. It's nice to have someone around who doesn't mind a little chaos." Jonathan chuckled, a sound that felt foreign yet refreshing. "I've spent so much time around chaos that I think I've forgotten how to embrace it." "Then you're in for a treat," Clara replied, tossing a handful of chopped carrots into a sizzling pan. "Life here is anything but predictable." He watched her as she worked, her hands moving with a confidence that he admired. "I can't say I've ever been in a kitchen quite like this. The closest I get are my chef-prepared meals at home." Clara raised an eyebrow, pausing for a moment. "You mean to tell me you've never cooked a meal for yourself?" Jonathan shook his head, feeling a bit sheepish. "I suppose that's the downside of having everything done for you. I never had to learn." "Well, you're in luck," she said with a playful grin. "You can start today. How about you stir the pot?" Taking a step closer, Jonathan accepted the wooden spoon she handed him. He stirred the bubbling mixture, trying to follow her lead. "This isn't so bad," he admitted, a smile creeping onto his face. "It's actually kind of therapeutic. See, I told you, cooking is a great way to unwind. You get to create something delicious while also feeding your soul," Clara said, her laughter echoing through the kitchen. As they continued to prepare the meal, Clara began to share stories about her family traditions during the holidays. "Every year we would gather at my grandmother's house. She would make the best tamales, and we'd spend the afternoon laughing and singing," she reminisced, her eyes glimmering with nostalgia. Jonathan leaned against the counter, captivated. "That sounds wonderful. We never had anything like that. My family was always too busy with work and social obligations to really connect." "Really? No traditions at all?" Clara asked, genuinely curious. "Not really," he confessed, his voice growing softer. "Growing up, it was all about appearances. We had parties and events, but they were more about networking than celebrating." Clara shook her head, her expression a mix of sympathy and disbelief. "That must have been lonely." "It was," Jonathan admitted, feeling an unexpected weight in his chest. "I always longed for something more real, something deeper, but I didn't know how to find it." She paused, wiping her hands on her apron and turning to face him fully. "You know, it's not too late to start building those connections. You just have to be brave enough to let people in." Jonathan met her gaze, feeling a strange connection forming between them. "I wish I had your courage. You seem to embrace life in a way that I've always struggled with." Clara smiled, a warm, encouraging smile that made him feel seen. It's all about perspective. Life throws challenges at us, but it's how we respond that defines us. Inspired by her words, Jonathan felt a stirring within him. They continued cooking, exchanging stories and laughter, the atmosphere in the kitchen growing lighter with each passing moment. Jonathan found himself sharing more about his life than he ever thought he would. He spoke of his childhood, of the extravagant gifts and the empty halls of his family's estate. As he talked, he could feel the walls he had built around himself beginning to crumble. "Do you ever miss it?" Clara asked as she seasoned the dish, her brow furrowed in thought. "The wealth and the parties?" Jonathan paused, considering her question thoughtfully. "Sometimes I do, but I miss the idea of it more than the reality. It was never fulfilling." "Maybe that's because you didn't have the right people around you," she suggested gently. "Wealth can't buy companionship." As they finished the meal, Clara led Jonathan to the small dining table set in the corner of the kitchen. It was simple yet inviting, adorned with a vase of wildflowers she had picked earlier that day. They sat down together, the food steaming in front of them. "Bon appétit!" Clara declared, lifting her fork with a flourish. Jonathan chuckled at her enthusiasm and followed suit, taking a bite of the dish they had prepared together. The flavors burst in his mouth, a comforting mix of spices and love. "This is incredible," he said, genuinely impressed. "I can't believe I've been missing out on this." Clara beamed with pride. "Cooking is an art, Jonathan. It's about love and connection. Each dish tells a story." As they ate, the conversation flowed easily, filled with laughter and anecdotes that brought them closer together. Jonathan realized that he was not just enjoying the meal, but also the company. There was a depth to Clara that fascinated him, a resilience that spoke to the core of his own struggles. After dinner, Clara suggested they decorate the house for New Year's. "I have some old decorations that we can use. It's not much, but it'll make the house feel festive." Jonathan nodded, feeling a sense of excitement building within him. "I'd love to help." Clara led him to the small storage closet, revealing a collection of handmade ornaments and strings of twinkling lights. They began to pull everything out, the air filled with anticipation and creativity. "Here, this one is my favorite," Clara said, holding up a small lopsided star made of cardboard and glitter. "I made this when I was a child. It's not perfect, but it has character." Jonathan examined the star, chuckling softly. "It's beautiful in its own way. It reminds me that perfection isn't everything." "Exactly. It's the imperfections that make things special," she said, her voice filled with warmth. As they decorated the small living room, Jonathan felt a joy he hadn't experienced in years. The simple act of hanging ornaments and stringing lights together made him feel alive, a stark contrast to the hollow celebrations of his past. "Look at this," Clara said, gesturing to a corner of the room where they had hung the lights. "It feels like magic, doesn't it?" Jonathan stepped back to admire their handiwork. The dim light cast a warm glow across the room, filling it with a sense of hope and cheer. "It really does," he agreed, his heart swelling with a feeling of belonging. In that moment, Jonathan realized that he had found something he had been searching for all along, a connection, a sense of home, and a friendship that transcended their differences. As he looked at Clara, her face lit by the soft glow of the lights, he felt a profound gratitude wash over him. "Thank you for sharing this with me," he said earnestly. "I've never felt so at peace." Clara smiled, her eyes shining. "I'm glad you're here, Jonathan. You're welcome to join our celebrations anytime. We make our own magic, you know." In that small, decorated living room, amidst the laughter and the warmth, Jonathan felt a new chapter beginning in his life, a chapter filled with possibility, connection, and the promise of a brighter future. For the first time in years, he felt hope. As night fell over Clara's small home, the golden glow from the fireplace flickered, casting dancing shadows across the walls. The warmth of the flames contrasted with the chilling winter air outside, creating a cocoon of intimacy that enveloped Jonathan and Clara. They sat on the worn but comfortable couch, a patchwork of fabrics that had absorbed countless moments of joy and sorrow. Jonathan gazed into the fire, watching the flames leap and twirl as if they were performing a ballet just for him. Clara, sensing the weight of the moment, turned to him. "You know, I never thought I'd celebrate New Year's Eve like this," she said, her voice soft but steady. "It's usually just me and the kids, and we make do with what we have. But this feels special." Jonathan nodded, a small smile creeping onto his face. Special indeed. It's been years since I've felt this way. Connected, I suppose. He hesitated before continuing. "What's it like for you, being a single mother? I imagine it must be quite challenging." Clara's expression shifted, and for a moment, Jonathan saw a flicker of vulnerability in her eyes. "It's not easy," she admitted, her gaze dropping to the floor. "There are days when I feel like I'm barely holding on. Between working 2 jobs, taking care of the kids, and managing everything else, sometimes it feels like I'm drowning." Jonathan leaned forward, drawn in by her honesty. "How do you do it? I mean, with all the responsibilities on your shoulders?" Clara chuckled softly, shaking her head. "I have to. They depend on me. I want my children to have a better life than I did. I grew up in a tough neighborhood, and my parents struggled to make ends meet. I promised myself I wouldn't let that happen to my kids." Her words struck a chord in Jonathan. He had grown up in a world of wealth and privilege, yet he felt no less burdened by his upbringing. "I understand that," he said, his voice low. "I had everything I could ever want, but it never felt like enough. I've spent my life chasing after success, but it's left me feeling empty. It's like I'm always searching for something I can't quite define." Clara looked at him, her expression shifting from sympathy to understanding. "Success is a tricky thing, isn't it? Everyone has their own definition. For some, it's money and power. For others, it's love and happiness. What do you want, Jonathan?" He paused, the question hanging in the air, heavy with significance. "I want to feel alive again. I want to connect with people, to experience life beyond the boardroom and the endless parties. I thought wealth would bring me happiness, but it hasn't. I feel like I'm missing out on something real." Clara's eyes sparkled with a mix of empathy and encouragement. "Then maybe it's time for a change. You don't have to live your life in isolation. There's a whole world out there full of people who would welcome you with open arms." Jonathan smiled, feeling a warmth spread through him that he hadn't experienced in years. "You make it sound so easy, Clara. But how do I break free from the chains of my past?" "Start small," she suggested. "Find joy in the little things. Spend time with people who lift you up. And above all, be true to yourself. It's easy to lose sight of who we are when we're chasing after what society tells us we should want." Her words resonated deeply with him, and he realized that in Clara's simple wisdom lay the answers he had been desperately seeking. "You have such a strong spirit," he said, admiration creeping into his voice. "I don't think I could ever be as resilient as you." Clara shook her head, a gentle smile gracing her lips. "You'd be surprised at what you can endure when you have no other choice. I've faced my fair share of challenges just like everyone else, but it's how we respond to those challenges that define us." As the fire crackled and popped, Jonathan felt a sense of camaraderie forming between them, a bond forged in shared struggles and desires. "What are your dreams for the future, Clara?" he asked, leaning back and allowing the warmth of the moment to wash over him. She looked thoughtful for a moment, her brow furrowing slightly. "I dream of a better life for my children. I want them to have opportunities I never had. I want to be able to give them a stable home, a chance to pursue their passions without the weight of financial worry." Jonathan admired her unwavering determination, and he felt a stirring in his heart. "You're a remarkable woman. Your children are lucky to have you." Clara chuckled softly, a hint of embarrassment creeping into her cheeks. "Thank you, but it's not about luck. It's about hard work and love. That's what makes a family strong." As they spoke, the clock on the wall ticked steadily, inching closer to midnight. Jonathan could feel the anticipation building in the air, a palpable energy that made him aware of just how transformative this evening had been. "What about you, Clara? What do you want for yourself?" She looked away for a moment, as if contemplating her own desires, and Jonathan sensed a longing behind her eyes. "I've always wanted to travel, to see the world beyond this small town. I want to experience different cultures, meet new people and learn from them. But right now, my priority is my family. Jonathan felt a pang of regret for the life he had led, filled with opportunities he had taken for granted, while Clara had been dreaming of the very same things he had experienced without appreciation. "Maybe one day," he said softly, "you can take that trip. You deserve it." She smiled, the warmth returning to her features. "Maybe one day. But for now, I'll focus on raising my children to be kind and strong, to dream big." As they shared their hopes and dreams, the atmosphere around them transformed. A sense of possibility hung in the air, inviting them to imagine futures unbound by their current realities. Jonathan raised his glass, the light catching the edges of the crystal as he offered a toast to new beginnings and the power of dreams. Clara followed suit, her own glass clinking against his with a soft, melodic sound. "To new beginnings and the strength within us to pursue them." The moment felt electric, as if both of them had stepped onto the precipice of something profound. In that shared silence, they both recognized that this unexpected connection had the potential to alter the courses of their lives forever. As the clock struck midnight, the air was thick with anticipation. A moment of silence enveloped Clara's modest living room, the only sound the soft crackle of the fireplace. Then, like a dam bursting, Clara's children burst into the room, their laughter ringing like bells. They were a whirlwind of energy, their faces lit with joy, eyes sparkling with the thrill of a new year beginning. "Happy New Year!" they shouted in unison, their voices harmonizing in a symphony of innocence. Jonathan couldn't help but smile, captivated by the sheer exuberance that filled the small space. Clara's eldest, a girl of about 8, twirled around, her dress spinning like a colorful top. "Look, Mum, look at me!" she exclaimed, her delight uncontainable. Jonathan watched as Clara's face transformed into a mask of love and pride, her heart visibly swelling with happiness as she crouched down to embrace her daughter. The warmth of the moment enveloped him, contrasting sharply with the cold, austere atmosphere that usually surrounded his life in the penthouse. Okay, one at a time," Clara laughed, her voice ringing with affection. "Let's take turns or we'll never get to celebrate properly." Her children nodded, still bubbling with excitement. Jonathan found himself swept into their world, helping Clara organize the chaos. He picked up a noisemaker that had fallen to the floor, its colors vibrant against the muted tones of the room. "Here you go," he said, handing it to the youngest child, a boy with tousled hair and an infectious grin. "You can be in charge of making the loudest noise." The boy's eyes widened as he took the noisemaker from Jonathan's hand. "I will," he declared, puffing out his chest, as if he were being given the greatest honor in the world. As the children reveled in their freedom, Clara's modest living room transformed into a festive sanctuary. The simple decorations glowed under the soft light, and the air smelled of the remnants of their earlier meal, roasted chicken and freshly baked bread. Jonathan felt an unexpected sense of contentment as he joined Clara in the light-hearted chaos, feeling more alive than he had in years. After a while, the children, exhausted from their revelry, were ushered off to bed. Clara tucked them in, her voice a soothing melody as she recounted a story about brave knights and beautiful princesses. Jonathan lingered in the doorway, watching the scene unfold. The sight of Clara, her hair softly illuminated by the single bedside lamp reading to her children, filled him with a warmth he had never known. It was a stark contrast to the sterile, impersonal gatherings he used to attend, where people hardly knew one another's names. Once the kids were asleep, Clara joined Jonathan outside where the night sky was a canvas of twinkling stars. The cold nipped at their cheeks, but the air was fresh and invigorating. They stepped into the small yard, the world around them quiet and peaceful. Jonathan leaned against the wooden railing, glancing at Clara, who stood beside him, her silhouette framed by the soft glow from the house. "Thanks for letting me be part of your celebration," he said, his voice low, almost reverent. "It was beautiful." Clara smiled, a hint of shyness creeping into her demeanor. "I'm glad you came. It's nice to have someone to share it with, especially on New Year's Eve. You know, it's not often we get to experience joy like this." Jonathan nodded, his gaze drifting to the stars above. "I can only imagine. Your children are extraordinary," he said, the words flowing from him easily. "They're full of life. It's refreshing. They are my everything." Clara's voice was soft yet firm, her eyes sparkling with the love she held for her children. "I do my best for them. They deserve a life filled with happiness, even if it means I have to work multiple jobs." The weight of her words hung in the air, and Jonathan turned to face her, eager to learn more. "I've been thinking a lot about what life means lately. I've lived so long in a world where success is measured by wealth and status, but it all feels so hollow. Seeing you and your children tonight, it's made me question everything." Clara looked at him, her expression shifting from surprise to understanding. She stepped closer, the warmth of her presence a comfort in the chilly night. "It's easy to get lost in that world," she said softly. "I know it well, but true happiness comes from the connections we build, the love we share. It's not about what you have, but who you have in your life." Jonathan considered her words, feeling a stirring in his heart. "I want to help," he blurted out, surprising himself. "Is there anything I can do for you? Anything at all? I mean it." Clara hesitated, her brow furrowing slightly. "I appreciate the offer, Jonathan, but I don't want charity," she replied, her voice steady yet tinged with uncertainty. "I've always managed on my own. I don't want to feel like I owe anyone anything." "Clara," he began, choosing his words carefully, "this isn't charity. I'm not looking to help you out of pity. I want to be your friend. I want to know you, to share my life with you if you'll let me. It's different this time." Her eyes searched his, looking for sincerity. In that moment, Jonathan realized how deeply he meant it. He wasn't just offering assistance, he was reaching out for connection, for a bond that transcended their social divide. "I see you, Clara," he continued, his voice earnest. "I see the strength in you, the love you have for your children. I want to be part of that. I want to learn from you." Clara's expression softened, the tension in her shoulders easing. "You really mean that, don't you?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "More than anything," he replied, his heart pounding with hope. "We all deserve friends who see us for who we are, not what we have." She took a deep breath, her resolve wavering. "All right," she said slowly, a hint of a smile breaking through. "But we do this as friends, nothing more. I'll share my life with you, but no strings attached." Jonathan grinned, a surge of happiness washing over him. "Of course. Friends it is," he said, extending his hand in a gesture of camaraderie. Clara took it, her grip firm and reassuring. As they stood there under the blanket of stars, Jonathan felt a warmth spread through him that he had long forgotten. It was a feeling of belonging, of purpose, a sense that perhaps this was the beginning of something profound. They had crossed a threshold, and he was no longer just the wealthy businessman in a cold penthouse. He was a friend, a confidant, and perhaps in time, much more. Little did they know, this moment was just the beginning of a journey that would forever alter their lives, intertwining their paths in ways they could never have anticipated. In the embrace of that cold night, surrounded by the warmth of friendship and the promise of connection, Jonathan felt the first stirrings of hope, a feeling that had been absent for far too long. Days turned into weeks, and the transformation in Jonathan was gradual yet profound. He found himself returning to Clara's modest home more frequently, the pull of her warmth and the laughter of her children becoming an irresistible draw. Each visit felt like shedding a layer of his former self, the man who had lost sight of what truly mattered in life. As spring began to bloom, so did their friendship. Jonathan immersed himself in the small joys of family life, helping Clara in her garden, playing games with her children, and sharing meals that were simple yet filled with laughter and authenticity. One sunny Saturday afternoon, the scent of freshly turned earth and blooming flowers filled the air as Jonathan knelt beside Clara in the garden. They were planting a row of tomatoes, a task that Jonathan had initially approached with the hesitation of a man used to boardrooms and business deals rather than dirt and seeds. "Just make sure you plant them deep enough," Clara instructed, her hands deftly working the soil. "They need a strong foundation to grow." Jonathan chuckled, shaking his head. I never imagined I'd be taking gardening tips from my housekeeper. Clara paused, looking at him with a playful glint in her eye. I prefer the term friend these days. Housekeeper feels so formal, don't you think? Fair point, he replied, a smile tugging at the corners of his lips. Let's just say I'm learning a lot from my friend. Their hands worked side by side, and as they planted the seedlings, the conversation flowed easily. Jonathan shared stories from his childhood, tales of family vacations that felt like distant memories now. Clara listened intently, her eyes sparkling with understanding. You had such a different life than mine, she said, wiping her brow with the back of her hand. I can only imagine what it must have been like to grow up in a world of privilege. It wasn't all it's cracked up to be, Jonathan admitted, a shadow crossing his face. I had everything materially, but I often felt alone. It's strange how wealth can create barriers instead of connections. Clara nodded empathetically, her hands stilling in the soil. I know what you mean. I've had my fair share of struggles, but they've taught me resilience. You know, every time I face a challenge, I remind myself that I'm stronger than I think. Tell me about it, Jonathan urged, intrigued. He had seen glimpses of her strength, but had not yet heard the full story. Clara took a deep breath, the weight of her past settling in. I grew up in a small town, the daughter of a single mother. She worked 2 jobs just to put food on the table. We didn't have much, but we had each other. Then when I was 15, she got sick. It was tough. I had to step up and help care for my siblings while juggling school. Jonathan listened, captivated by the resilience in her voice. That sounds incredibly difficult. I can't imagine having to grow up so fast. It was, she admitted, her eyes reflecting a mix of pain and pride. But it shaped me. When I had my own children, I promised myself I would give them a better life, even if it meant working multiple jobs. I've learned to appreciate the little moments, the laughter, the love. That's what matters most. As she spoke, Jonathan felt a deep admiration swell within him. Clara's strength was not just in her perseverance. It radiated from the way she spoke of her children, her love for them evident in every word. You inspire me, Clara, he said softly. You've faced so much and yet remain so positive. I've spent my life chasing after success, but I've never truly understood what it means to live. Clara smiled warmly, her expression illuminating the garden around them. And you inspire me, Jonathan. You've taken a chance to step out of your comfort zone. That takes courage. Just then, Clara's children ran into the garden, their laughter echoing like music. Mom, can we help? The youngest shouted, his face smeared with dirt from a previous adventure. Of course, come here, Clara beckoned, her face lighting up with joy. Jonathan watched as she effortlessly transitioned into her role as a mother, her patience and love enveloping the children like a warm blanket. Can I help too? Jonathan asked, feeling a sudden rush of eagerness to be part of this little family. Absolutely. You can be our official tomato planter, Clara teased, directing him to show the children how to plant the seedlings. As they worked together, Jonathan felt a growing sense of belonging, something he had longed for but had never truly experienced. The children giggled, asking questions about the plants, and Jonathan found himself explaining how tomatoes grew, his heart swelling with joy at their curiosity. It was a stark contrast to the sterile boardrooms and business meetings that had once dominated his life. Later that evening, after the garden was tended to and the children were tucked into bed, Clara and Jonathan sat on the porch, watching the sun set in a blaze of orange and purple hues. The air was filled with the sweet scent of blooming flowers, and the world felt serene. Do you think you'll ever go back to your old life? Clara asked quietly, breaking the comfortable silence that had settled between them. Jonathan pondered the question, his mind racing with thoughts of his life in the city. I don't know, he finally replied. Before I met you, I thought I had it all figured out. But now, I feel like I've discovered something worth holding on to. Clara turned to him, her gaze piercing yet gentle. You deserve to find happiness, Jonathan, whatever that means for you. He nodded, feeling the weight of her words. You've shown me that happiness isn't about wealth or status. It's in the connections we forge and the moments we share. Clara smiled, her eyes reflecting the last rays of sunlight. Exactly. Life can be beautiful even in its simplest forms. As they sat there in the fading light, Jonathan felt a sense of peace he had never known. The laughter of Clara's children echoed in his mind, the warmth of her companionship wrapping around him like a comforting embrace. He had found something precious in the most unexpected of places, a sense of purpose, a connection, and a glimpse of what true happiness could be. However, just as Jonathan began to imagine a new life intertwined with Clara's, his phone buzzed, shattering the tranquil moment. He glanced at the screen, his heart sinking as he recognized the name. It was his business partner, Nathan. "I should take this," he said reluctantly, rising from his seat. Clara's expression shifted slightly, a mix of concern and understanding. "Of course," she replied softly. "I'll be right here." Taking a deep breath, Jonathan answered the call, the tension of the moment hanging in the air. "Nathan, what's going on?" "Jonathan, we have a crisis on our hands. I need you back in the city immediately." Nathan's voice crackled through the line, urgency lacing his words. Jonathan's heart raced, the familiar weight of his old life pressing down on him. "What kind of crisis?" "There's been a major issue with our largest client. If we don't resolve this quickly, it could mean huge losses for the company. I need you here to help manage the situation." As the words sank in, Jonathan felt a deep chasm opening between him and the life he had begun to envision with Clara. The reality of his old life loomed large, a stark reminder of the responsibilities and pressures that had once consumed him. But as he glanced back at Clara sitting quietly on the porch, he couldn't help but feel that he had a choice to make, a choice that would redefine the path ahead. Jonathan stood at the window of his high-rise office, looking down at the bustling city below. The lights twinkled like stars scattered across a distant galaxy, but the view felt hollow to him. Just days ago, he had been immersed in the warmth of Clara's simple home, sharing laughter and stories that had awakened something deep within him. Now, encased in glass and steel, he was reminded of the isolation that wealth brought him. He had taken the call from his business partner out of obligation, but dread gnawed at him as he recalled the joy he had experienced over the past few weeks. As he listened to the frantic voice on the other end of the line, Jonathan felt an internal struggle. "Jonathan, we have a serious issue on our hands," his partner Mark said, his tone urgent. "I need you back in the office immediately. We're facing a potential crisis that could cripple the company." "Mark, I just need a little more time. Things have been—" "Jonathan, you can't just abandon the ship when there's a storm brewing. You're the captain here and the crew is counting on you," Mark interrupted, his voice rising with each word. Jonathan sighed deeply, his mind racing back to Clara's laughter, the warmth of her home, and the unconditional love she showed her children. "Fine, I'll be there in an hour," he replied, the words tasting bitter in his mouth. The commute back to the city was torturous. Jonathan's mind oscillated between the vibrant moments he had shared with Clara and the suffocating expectations of his corporate life. He felt as if he were being pulled in two directions, one toward the genuine connections he had just begun to cultivate, and the other toward a world of cold calculations and relentless ambition. As he entered the sleek office building, Jonathan was immediately engulfed by the familiar buzz of corporate urgency. Employees hurried past him, their faces etched with stress. He made his way to the conference room where Mark awaited him, flanked by a group of anxious executives. "Glad you could join us," Mark said, his expression a mix of concern and irritation. "We thought you'd bail on us." "What's the situation?" Jonathan asked, trying to shake off the remnants of his earlier joy. Mark cleared his throat, his eyes darting between Jonathan and the others. "There's been a rumor circulating about our financial stability. Someone leaked information, and our stock prices have taken a hit. We need to address this immediately." Jonathan's heart raced as he listened. He had been so consumed with his new life that he hadn't realized how precarious his old one had become. "Who was behind this?" he asked, voice steady but filled with urgency. "We believe it was an inside job," Mark replied, frustration seeping into his tone. "Someone is trying to destabilize us, and we need to find out who before it's too late." As the meeting progressed, Jonathan's mind drifted, calculating the cost of his absence from Clara's life. Was it too late to turn back? He felt trapped, ensnared in a web of responsibilities and expectations that suffocated him. The joyous moments he had shared with Clara and her family now felt like a distant dream. Hours passed, and the meeting ended without resolution, leaving Jonathan feeling more disillusioned than ever. In a moment of clarity, he could no longer ignore the truth. He was not just a businessman, but a man in search of meaning. The crisis wasn't a legitimate threat. It was a manipulation by Mark to keep him tethered to the corporate life he had begun to reject. As he stormed out of the office, fury bubbled within him. He had been a pawn in a game he no longer wanted to play. He pulled out his phone and dialed Clara's number, the sound of her voice on the other end grounding him. "Clara, I'm coming back," he said without preamble, urgency lacing his words. "Jonathan, is everything okay?" she asked, concern evident in her tone. "No, but I'm done with this charade. I need to be with you, where it matters," he replied, determination flooding his heart. "Are you sure? I don't want you to feel obligated," she said softly. "It's not obligation, Clara. It's choice." "I choose you," he declared, feeling a weight lift from his shoulders. After hanging up, Jonathan rushed to his car, the engine roaring to life as he sped through the city. The familiar streets now felt like an obstacle course of his past life, each traffic light a reminder of the decisions he had made. As he drove, his heart raced with anticipation and fear. What awaited him at Clara's home? Would she welcome him back with open arms, or would she question his sincerity? Upon arriving at Clara's house, he hesitated for a moment, the warmth of her home visible through the window. He could see her moving about, her children playing in the living room. Taking a deep breath, he knocked on the door and Clara opened it almost immediately. "Jonathan," she exclaimed, her eyes lighting up. "I didn't expect you back so soon. Is everything all right?" "I need to tell you something," he said, stepping inside. The familiar scent of home enveloped him, and he felt a sense of belonging wash over him. "Is it about work?" Clara asked, concern creeping into her voice. "It was a false alarm. Mark orchestrated everything to keep me tied to the company. I realized I don't want that life anymore," he confessed, his voice trembling with emotion. "Then what do you want?" Clara asked, her eyes searching his. "I want to be here with you. I want to be part of this family," he said, his heart pounding in his chest. For a moment, Clara looked taken aback, her expression a mixture of surprise and uncertainty. "Jonathan, I appreciate that. But what about your life in the city? Your business, your wealth?" Jonathan stepped closer, his resolve unwavering. "That life was never fulfilling. It was a facade, and I'm done pretending. I want something real, something meaningful. I want to build a life with you, Clara." Clara's eyes glistened with unshed tears and a smile broke through. "You know, I've been hiding something from you too," she whispered, her voice shaky. "What is it?" he asked, curiosity piquing. "I'm not just Clara, the housekeeper. I was born into wealth, the daughter of a businessman. After my mother died, my father abandoned me. I've spent my life trying to survive, not wanting anyone to know who I really am," she confessed, her vulnerability laid bare. Jonathan's heart sank at the revelation, but instead of disbelief, he felt admiration. "Clara, your strength is incredible. You've built a beautiful life despite everything. That's worth more than any fortune." "I've found true happiness in my children and the life I've created," she said softly, her eyes meeting his. "But I never thought someone like you would choose me. Because I see you for who you truly are. It's not about money or status. It's about connection and love. Together, we can redefine what happiness means," Jonathan replied, the intensity of his feelings shining through. As they stood in the cozy living room, surrounded by the laughter of Clara's children, Jonathan felt a sense of peace wash over him. He understood now that wealth was not measured in dollars, but in relationships and the bonds they created. They stood together, ready to forge a new path, hand in hand, united by a love that transcended their pasts. In that moment, the future felt bright and full of promise. A tapestry woven from the threads of two lives coming together, each richer for the other's presence. Jonathan smiled at Clara, knowing that this was just the beginning of their shared journey, one that would redefine their destinies forever.